Snippets are a feature in VS Code that allow you to quickly inject commonly used code into your files. VS Code comes built in with a bunch of snippets, but you can also create your own. And that's what I'm going to quickly show you how to do in this guide. Step one, we're going to open up the command palette. We can use our keyboard shortcuts to do that. On Mac, it's Command-Shift-P. On Windows, it's Control-Shift-P. Let me show this in action. I'm going to switch over to VS Code. I am on a Mac, so I'm going to do Command-Shift-P. Within our commands, we want to find Configure User Snippets. In my case, it's under Recently Used, but if you don't see it, you can just start to type it out to search for it. I'm going to choose that. Then I'll see a series of sub-options. The one we're going to choose is we're going to create a new global snippets file. This is going to give us the ability to create snippets that can work in different file types. As an alternative to this, you can create language-specific snippet files. For example, we see one here for JavaScript, so those snippets would only work in JavaScript files. That is one way of organizing your snippets, but like I said, we're going to go with a global snippets file. Next, it'll prompt you to come up with a name for the file. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to just call mine My Snippets. And then it should open a new file with a .code snippets extension. And you can see the location of where this was put. You can see the path. It's going to vary depending on your operating system. And this is just useful to note because if you ever want to go directly to your snippet configuration files, you'll want to go to this path. Within the starter code, we see some instructions as well as an example, which let's go ahead and uncomment that to learn how we're going to write snippets. As you can see, the format we're using in here is JSON syntax. So we have an outer object, and then each snippet is going to be an element in this object. For the key of the element, you want to have a brief description of what the snippet is doing. And then for your options, you have things like scope, where you can specify which file types the snippet would work with. So in this example, the snippet here would work in a JavaScript file or a TypeScript file. If you omit the scope option, this would work in any file. And whether or not you include the scope really depends. If you're creating a snippet that is specific to a language, just go ahead and include the scope. That way in other files where you wouldn't actually use that snippet, you're not going to see that in your list of snippet options when you're using them. The next configuration is for the prefix that will trigger the snippet. And in this example, it's log. So to see this in action, I'm going to actually switch over to this demo JavaScript file I have open. And if I just start typing log, it pulls up several snippet options that match this prefix, with the first one, the closest match, being the custom snippet that we're currently working on. In fact, here you can see that print to console text. This corresponds to the key that we gave this particular snippet. Now we do see another log there, the second option, that looks like it's probably doing a very similar thing. The description here is log to the console. This is probably coming from one of the built-in snippets that VS Code comes with for JavaScript. So the snippet we're working with in this example is redundant, but that's okay. It's just for the purposes of the demonstration. After the prefix, you're going to define the body of the snippet. This is the actual code that you want to be injected. And one way you can define this is as an array of strings, where each string is going to represent a line in the code that's getting injected. So in this example, we've got two lines. The first one is console.log, and then the $1 in this first line, and then the $2 in the second line. This is a special syntax we can use in our snippets to represent placeholders. Placeholders are used to locate the cursor when you're using the snippet. So what will happen with this snippet is when we first enter it, the $1 is going to be the first position that our cursor is going to be placed at. And let's see this in action. So if I go back to my test file, I'm going to type in log again. I'm going to choose the first option, and you could see my cursor put it right where that $1 is. So when I'm using this, I can quickly type whatever text I wanted to log to the console, and then to jump to the next line or the next placeholder, I'll just use the tab key, and you can see it brings my cursor down to the second line. The final configuration is for description, where you can provide a brief summary of the snippet. And where you'll see this used is when you're pulling up the snippets. If you use your arrow key to highlight one and then hover over it, you'll see this little arrow. And if you click that, it'll give you more information about that snippet, including your description. So applying what we just learned, let's create another snippet just to make sure we're clear on all the details. And what I'd like to do is to put together a basic snippet for a JavaScript function. So what we're going to be aiming for is a snippet that looks like this. We'll start with the function keyword. After that, we need some name for the function, and this is a good place to put a placeholder, so we can type that name in. So this would be our first placeholder, the first place that our cursor is going to go when we're using this snippet. Following the name of the function, we will have potentially some parameters within parentheses. So again, I'm going to use a placeholder here. Let's indicate this as cursor position number 2. And then we'll need a start and closing curly brackets for the body of the function. And we'll use a third placeholder just to get us into the body of the function. So this is what we want to create. So I'm going to copy this, go back to our code snippets file. I'll just paste this at the end for right now. And I'll use our existing example as our template. So I'm just going to duplicate that, and then we'll rename it. We'll just call this function. We're going to use the same scope. For prefix, let's say func. And actually, just to show you that you can have multiple prefixes, what I'm going to do is instead of specifying a string here, I'm going to do an array of strings. So let's have this triggered by either func or let's just say F for short. For the body, let's transfer in the first line, the second line, which is just a placeholder, and then the third line is our closing bracket. Now for the second line, the body, I actually want this to be indented. So to accomplish that, I'm going to use a \T for the tab character. And this will indent this line using whatever indentation settings I have for the file. So if I'm indenting using tabs, we'll see a tab there. If I'm indenting using spaces, it'll insert spaces there. All right, so let's get rid of this scratch code down here and go back to our JavaScript file to test this out. So down below, I'm just going to start typing F. That should be one of our prefixes that should trigger this. And sure enough, we can click on that. You can see our first cursor point is for the name of the function. Now let's call it XYZ. If I hit tab, it's going to take me to my second placeholder for parameters. Let's say we didn't have any parameters here. I could just not type anything. And if I hit tab, it's going to take me to my third placeholder point, which you can see this particular file I am indenting using 4 spaces. So you can see that represented here. And of course, I could write out whatever the body of the function is. And just to show that our multiple prefixes are working, I could also locate it with the func prefix I had defined. And that's the basics of creating snippets. Just a quick note, if let's say we were done creating snippets, we went away from it, and down the road we wanted to edit our snippets, we would follow the same procedure we did to find that file initially, where we're going to bring up the command palette. We're going to find the option for configuring user snippets, but this time rather than going to new global snippets file, we should see our existing snippets file that we created. So we could just click on that, bring that up again, and make any edits that we need.